I'm joined by Pastor Tope Koleoso of Jubilee Church London, which is a fantastic multi-ethnic church that I've watched, and we've been friends for years. You were telling us about how important the cultural moment of George Floyd's death is. Tell us what you felt, Tope, when you watched that video or saw those images for the first time.
Well, thank you, Charlie. It's great to be with you. When I saw the video, I really was shocked and stunned, frankly, chagrined to a spot, because what you saw in front of you was a black man on the floor there with handcuffed behind, but a white man's knee was on his throat. And I think what was so graphic and gruesome about it was the man was basically begging for his life as he was saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And those who were injuring him were those supposed to protect him. And to see something like that in broad daylight was just horrific in every way. And those are the emotions that conjured up in me were just, I think it was a range from shock all the way into anger. How can this level of injustice happen?
And it is a terrible sight, but I think it reminded you of things in the United Kingdom. That's in the United States, and what I've heard you call the underbelly of racism in the United Kingdom, and you've named that. Or perhaps racism experiences for yourself and your family. Tell us what you think about that.
Yeah, well, you're right, because I feel that, yes, that happened in America. And I guess for certain reasons, civil rights movements and so on, it can seem a bit more incendiary over there. But the truth is, there's an atmosphere that makes that kind of thing happen and be okay. Now, for us, we are cultivating that atmosphere. It is covert by here for the most part. But the important thing for us to know really is that wherever there's prejudice or the way we think, it leads to discrimination actions we take, and it begins to become racism, where you have the system of the structures in society is so built that it favors one lot of people and kind of almost not realizing it discriminates against another. For me, my own example of life would be, I remember many years ago, one of the first experiences for my own son, we're in the car together, the policeman stops us, and he comes and he checks through, asks me the regular questions. By the way, he's worth saying he was polite, at the end of which he says to me, "Okay, where are you going?" and so on. Then he says, "Well, you can just imagine, I saw there's a black man driving with a cap on and a child beside him. It just didn't look right, so I had to stop you. But I can see you're a well-behaved person. You can go on." My son he just could not understand what the crime was, or what it is that was so wrong that necessitated him to stop us. Of course, he realized because we are black, try to explain it to him. That was one of the first moments. Now, one could have many more. I have many more of those kinds of stories. Mm-hmm. That's what racism looks like. Picked out on account of your color and responded to negatively.
I'm so sorry that happened in this country of which you are a part. We need your forgiveness for these moments. And what does that do to your son, do you think, or people in his generation who are perhaps not in Christian homes? And how important is this cultural moment that we're living through now, do you think?
That's a great question, because this is a very important cultural moment, because there's a shift that is massively happening. For people like me and my age and those generation above me, in a way, they've gone through so much of it, normalized it, learned to handle it. There's another generation that were born here, grown up here, and then they're realizing the differences. They're a far more vocal generation. They are more angry and so on. Both my sons are Christians, and I thank the Lord for it. But then there's so many who are not. And so the way it's going to work out is going to be not very good for us as a nation. It'll feed into separation in the church and in society. And that is the last thing that we want. And so I feel we all need to take it very seriously.
And what do you think the church can do? What would your counsel be, or what have you been calling for?
Yeah. Well, I think the church, first of all, has to acknowledge it and say this thing is not just one little isolated incident. It is sin, and call it is racism, and that racism is a sin, and the gospel stands completely against it. And then I would encourage leaders everywhere, pastors, particularly white pastors, all pastors, to start conversations and allow this thing to be spoken of, because it will diffuse things from being pent up on, remove them from being covert and hidden, and then they become incendiary. And then I think in the end, every single Christian, every cross bearer should learn to act and speak up against racism wherever they see it. You don't have to be aggressive or nasty, but just to point it out and not just walk on by from it, no matter how small an expression it is.
So kind of structural change coming. You've built a great multicultural church with Africans, people from the Caribbean, Eastern European white people, and British white people, Caucasians. How do you do that?
Well, I think the Lord has really, really helped us, because we just, I know for sure it was in my heart, it was in our heart. And so, but some basic things really would be that one needs to be biblically persuaded by it and see right through the scriptures, and then you go from there. Because if you don't do that, you will go by emotional reactions. When a problem comes up later, you pull back, and that creates carnage. And so be biblically persuaded. I would encourage that leaders have to teach on it regularly. One new man, Ephesians 3, Revelations 5, throne room of God, every tribe, every language. And then I would say to build wisely, to involve and include people from different races and ethnics, and be ready to learn. Because sometimes if those who are going to be choosing small group leaders are all of one mindset, one worldview, one background, they're only going to choose people like themselves, because their criteria, they're going to fix those who choose those who fit it. But if, on the other hand, you're wider and broader, you have friends from different backgrounds who can help educate you and open up, you will learn to pick up the nuances, and then they come through, not just in the congregation, right into leadership. This is important. I think Jesus demonstrates this for us when he goes into the temple and he sees the money changers who had made everything supposed to be about God. It's woven into the fabric of how things are worked, and some are victims of it. He comes, he overturns it and protests against the whole thing. But then he does speak to them. It is said that my house will be a house of prayer for the nations. And then all the other people come into the temple. So the church needs to be like Jesus. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. There's a lot in there, which we'll unpack in the weeks to come. But you mentioned a house of prayer for all nations, which I know is dear to your heart. You have a New Year's Eve watch night event with thousands of people praying. What do you think the church of the future will look like, as well as being a house of prayer, after these days of rioting and readjustment, and then after COVID?
Well, I think it will be very digital in some of the its fixtures. I think that I think it will be very young in its leadership. I think either it morphs and allows them to come through, or they shift to go to other places and plant other churches. I think it's the day for the millennials. It's another generation. I do hope that the church comes out keeping its evangelistic fervor that it got at this time.
Yeah. And what about the elders like me? Is there any room for them?
Oh, the millennials may have read the books and be articulate, but they are always going to need fathers.
Well, God bless you, Tope, for sharing. We've loved having you, and may God bless your church and all that you're doing at this time.
And you, God bless.